CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Norwegia Barkill.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Spinning a deal for OneWeb. France's top satellite company wants to merge with its British rival.
Ukraine says grain shipments could resume this week, but warns any more strikes on the port of Odessa will have major consequences.
Europe's largest budget airline, Ryanair, returns to profit for the first time since the pandemic began, but warns the industry remains fragile.
Hungary's dying lakes. Environmentalists call for urgent action before the damage is irreversible. And the new football season's set for kick-off, but fans can't wear the colours. English clubs say they need extra time to get hold of their new kits. Shares in France's biggest satellite firm Eutelsat tumbled more than 17% after its confirmed plans to buy rival company OneWeb. It's less than 2 years since OneWeb was bailed out by the British government.
The deal would bring together the UK, Chinese and French governments as common shareholders. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Ross Cullen, who's in Paris. So, Ross, what more can you tell us about the deal?
Well, Robin, these negotiations have been taking place for months. They were codenamed Erica, and we do now see that proposal for a possible deal between Eutelsat, the French satellite company, and the British-based OneWeb. It would create this pan-European giant in satellite internet technology to take on Starlink from Elon Musk and Kuiper from Jeff Bezos to try to provide internet to as many millions of people as possible via satellites, a network or a constellation of satellites around Earth.
So why does France want to buy the company, and how does it play into Europe's space ambitions?
The European ambitions for space are all focused around sovereignty, this issue that we have seen gaining ground since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic and since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, to pool and strengthen your sovereignty on supply chains so you can rely on Europe to provide for European citizens. Sovereignty when it comes to medicines, defence and now space, to be able to create a European-based internet satellite giant, to be able to promote that European sovereignty and support that European industry when it comes to development within the space sector.
And any deal would involve lots of investors. Just how complicated is it?
Well, we've already heard from Eutelsat, which has put forward this proposal, but it does say in its press release that there are no assurances that there will be an agreement between Eutelsat and OneWeb. That made investors nervous. We heard Nui just listing the share price there was down 17% today here in Paris over the possible uncertainties that remain, some of the negotiations that need to be ironed out, some of the complications you mentioned, Robin, with a Japanese bank, a Korean bank, an Indian billionaire, the UK government, a French company. So there are complications related to this deal, but it has been announced that it is a possibility that this could go through. So we'll be watching now to see if the agreement can be signed and if there is a deal for Eutelsat to buy OneWeb.
Ross, thank you very much. That's our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris.
Tesla has increased its capital expenditure plan by $1 billion after CEO Elon Musk referred to the car maker's new factories as gigantic money furnaces. The revised plan was revealed in a regulatory filing that's also disclosed details of a new subpoena from securities regulators over Musk's 2018 tweet about taking Tesla private.
Ground staff at Germany's national airline Lufthansa will stage a one-day strike on Wednesday in a row over pay. The walkout will cause cancellations and delays, adding to a summer season already hampered by staff shortages and long queues at major travel hubs. Frankfurt, Düsseldorf and Berlin are some of the airports affected.
Russia's currency, the ruble, has fallen in value after Friday's decision by Moscow's central bank to cut interest rates. It's now worth around 58 to the dollar. So far this year, the ruble has been the world's strongest performing currency, propped up by government efforts to shield Russia's financial system from Western sanctions.
Grain shipments from Ukraine could restart as early as this week, according to Kyiv, after a deal with Russia.
But it's warned exports will be affected by further missile strikes on the port of Odessa. Global wheat prices rose sharply after Russia targeted the city over the weekend, shortly after signing a deal to facilitate the release of millions of tons of grain stuck at Black Sea ports.
Moscow says it attacked military infrastructure and insists the agreement will not be derailed.
Let's speak to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow, and a reminder that journalists in Russia are working under media laws that restrict what they can report. Stuart, what's the Kremlin's response to all of this been then?
Well, the Kremlin says that this missile strike cannot and should not affect the start of the grain export process in any way. The Ministry of Defence makes a distinction between the operations and infrastructure of the port itself and what it says it hit with high-precision guided missiles, which the Ministry of Defence said were being launched against a warehouse full of Harpoon missiles, which had been intended to be used against Russia's Black Sea fleet. A valid military target, the Russian Foreign Ministry says, which is completely unrelated to any of the infrastructure required to export grain. The Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, said when Russia signed this agreement, it did not undertake to stop the special military operation in Ukraine, and none of its previous agreements or courses of action should be interpreted as such. And Sergei Lavrov also confirmed, he said, that he had spoken to representatives of the United Nations on Monday who confirmed his understanding of the documents was correct.
And you mentioned the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, there. He's currently in Africa, a part of the world that's becoming even more important to Russia at the moment.
That's right. He's going to visit 4 different countries. He's already been to Egypt, where he spoke to Egyptian officials. Egypt's been the most of the 4 countries that he's visiting when it comes to Russia's operations in Ukraine. The Egyptian officials say they're calling for a political and diplomatic settlement as soon as possible. He spoke to diplomats from the Arab League there, where Sergei Lavrov told ambassadors that the West is lying about the sanctions imposed on Russia and their impact on world food. On Tuesday, he's been in the Republic of Congo, a nation which was neutral on that important United Nations vote about Russia's actions. The Republic of Congo has expressed concern about these grain shipments. Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday reassured them that everything would continue as planned. And he also told or thanked African leaders in general for what he said resisting the West's attempts to impose a unipolar world order. Then in Uganda, which he's going to later today and into tomorrow, he's going to be talking to the President's office about a defence, economic and technical deal with cooperation envisaged, for example, on weapons, and also potentially a broadcasting deal which might see Russia's state broadcaster RT at least being aired twice daily on Ugandan TV. Then finally to Ethiopia, one of the few countries that was absent on that UN vote. The most important thing there, most likely for Sergei Lavrov, is a meeting with diplomats from various African Union countries who will be talking about Russia's actions in Ukraine.
Thanks for that, Stuart. That's our correspondent, Stuart Smith, live for us in Moscow.
The city of Odessa is one of Ukraine's most strategically important locations. It's home to the country's navy and is a key shipping and transport hub.
And as our correspondent Stephanie Fried has been finding out, holding on to it will be vital for Ukraine's economy.
Odessa is Ukraine's 3rd largest city with a population of just over 1 million. The local economy normally relies heavily on tourism. The Russia-Ukraine conflict has shut that down. It has also shut down the local port, Ukraine's largest and one of the region's most important shipping hubs since the time of the Russian Empire. Prior to the current conflict, according to one analyst, 25% of exports to Europe passed through Odessa. The port also has a gas and oil storage capacity of 25 million tons.
Seagoing vessel shipment operations very important for Ukrainian economic and for world economic also.
As the Ukraine Navy's main hub, Odessa's port is also strategic.
If Russia will have a navy presence in Odessa, so they basically will control the entire trade market in the Black Sea.
That will increase Ukraine and Europe's energy dependence on Russia, and it will drive inflation and prices higher. Ukraine and Russia agreed last week to allow millions of tons of grain to be exported from ports on the Black Sea. Demining those waters will be a priority. Stephanie Fried, CGTN, Odessa, Ukraine.
Still ahead on Global Business Europe. Circling back to profit. Good news for Europe's largest budget airline amid a flurry of corporate earnings.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Soaring energy prices, surging inflation, strained supply chains. As costs spiral and goods run short, people are feeling the heat. Join us for a special new series, starting August the 1st, here on CGTN.
Welcome back. Just a reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
It's a bumper week for corporate earnings, with major European companies set to reveal how they're coping with supply chain issues as well as soaring inflation. Here in London, the FTSE 100 gained 0.33%. Banks and miners driving most of the gains. But investors are also keeping a close eye on the US Federal Reserve and what happens on the other side of the Atlantic. The central bank is expected to raise interest rates on Wednesday to try and combat rising prices. Over in Germany, the flagship index, the DAX, posted a smaller gain. Business confidence in Europe's largest economy has fallen to its lowest level for more than 2 years. Investors worry the Russian gas crisis could tip Germany into recession. In Paris, the CAC ended the day more or less unchanged. Again, energy and inflation weighing on stock markets all across the globe. Let's try and make sense of it and talk about the biggest talking points from earnings season so far. Victoria Scholar is Head of Investment at Interactive Investor and joins us now. Victoria, thanks for being here. Ryanair has made its first spring profits since the coronavirus pandemic hit. How is the airline navigating the challenging backdrop of volatile fuel prices as well as the travel chaos we're seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no doubt that Ryanair is having a tough time at the moment, like many airlines and indeed the broader travel industry. But despite this, like you say, it managed to achieve a strong earnings quarter, logging a profit of 170 million euros. That was ahead of expectations, but it was about 2/3 of the profit that it made in the same period of 2019, before the onset of the pandemic, of course. But Ryanair is saying that the recovery is still very fragile, and that means that it's unable to provide any guidance looking ahead. But like you say, there's a whole host of challenges that the whole sector is dealing with following the war in Ukraine. You know, we've seen the consequent soaring prices. There's also staff shortages and the spread of COVID. And that's why we've seen so many unhappy passengers on the front of newspapers in recent months, with the sector hit by strikes, cancellations and delays. And Ryanair share price is down by about 30% this year since the February peak.
Yeah, and another major company in Europe where there are changes up at the top is Volkswagen. Porsche's CEO now takes over the top job. What can we expect from the new CEO, do you think, and what sort of legacy will outgoing Herbert Diess leave?
Well, it feels as though there were already concerns about the incoming CEO, Oliver Blume, and whether or not he's actually got the capacity to take on this huge job, because he's already the chief executive of Porsche, a role that he's not planning to give up. So investors are a bit worried that he might be taking on a bit more than he can handle, especially given that Porsche is set for an IPO in the fourth quarter. So there are worries that he's spreading himself a bit too thinly. But some investors are thinking that long-term, this isn't going to work. And then to your second question about the legacy of Herbert Diess, you know, he took on Volkswagen and took to the top job at a really challenging time. It was in the aftermath of the emissions scandal. Really helped to drive VW towards electric vehicles. But ultimately, he ended up clashing with unions, suggesting that the group had too much staff. And also, he got in a bit of controversy given that he kept comparing VW to its rival Tesla.
And one major company reporting this week, French conglomerate, luxury retail conglomerate LVMH. What can we expect there, do you think, particularly given the issues we've been talking about, inflation and the cost of living crisis around the world?
Certainly, it feels as though a lot of companies are going to be affected by inflation, like you say, and the cost of living crisis. But compared to its rivals, LVMH is expected to perform a little bit better. We're expecting second quarter sales of around 17 billion euros and operating profits of nearly 10 billion euros. On the one hand, you know, there is likely to be a strong year-on-year comparison given where we were in terms of the pandemic this time last year, but we are looking at quarter-on-quarter slowdowns. Clearly, luxury is affected by China, one of its key markets. That's been facing COVID lockdown, so that could potentially weigh on results. But we are looking for the conglomerate that's the owner of Louis Vuitton and Dior to outpace some of its rivals.
The key one to watch this week. Thank you for joining us. That's Victoria Scholar, Head of Investment at Interactive Investor.
So that's the picture in Europe, but it's also a big week for earnings over in the United States. Let's go to the New York Stock Exchange and talk to our correspondent there, John Terrett. So, John, some big tech earnings to look out for this week.
Robin and Naweed, I tell you, it is hitting us this week. By the time we get to Friday here, we're all going to be flat on our backs with exhaustion because there is so much data coming down the pike. I can't remember a week quite like this. Yeah, we've got big tech earnings. We've got the growth figures coming out on Thursday, and on Wednesday the Federal Reserve will look at interest rates and they're likely to raise them. We'll get to that in a minute. Let me tell you about the tech earnings first of all. They are some of the very biggest names that you know and love, like Meta, which you know better as Facebook, Apple, Google, Amazon. And the problem is that last week we didn't get off to a very good start with these big tech companies. Snap Inc., which is far smaller than the ones I've just mentioned, far smaller, but nonetheless of enormous interest, basically said that its earnings in the third quarter, which we're in now, were flat, and it didn't issue any guidance. And I've told you before on this program, you never want to not issue guidance. It's like crime number one here, and they didn't. So news came out on Thursday, their shares were down 27%. On Friday, they were down just under 40%. They're up a little bit now. But the other one was Twitter. They missed their Wall Street expectations. And who do you think they blamed for that? Who would you blame if you were Twitter? That's right. They blamed the man who, by the way, has not been out of the news all weekend. on personal issues, which we won't go into here, it doesn't matter. But he did tweet on Friday saying of Twitter, "I'm rubber, they're glue." Nobody quite knows what that means, but that is indeed what he tweeted. Now, the problem with these tech companies is seems to be advertising. It seems to be dropping off big time now. And that's why these companies like Google and Meta and Alphabet and Amazon as well, even Amazon, are likely to be affected by that. But, of course, the tech stocks are priced for the future. That's the thing. So when Wall Street, when you see these tech stock share prices going up, Wall Street's not really looking at next week or even next year. There's a calculation that they use for how much they might make in the future, which is why when the 10-year yield on the interest rate, the 10-year yield goes above 3%, it always hurts tech stocks. Anyway, let's concentrate on Apple, because as you know, Apple makes the iPhone basically in China, and we're expecting a slowing of growth with Apple, quite likely. They've been forecast to be making global job cuts in 2023 to prepare for what they see as a downturn. And news just in, they're organizing a discount weekend in China. So if you are watching us in China, watch out for the discount weekend. You'll be able to get $89 off an iPhone 13 very soon. All the tech stocks are down, but they are off their worst. Guys?
And then, of course, we have to talk about the Fed on Wednesday.
Yeah, we should get through these next two topics very quickly. The Fed on Wednesday, in June, they hiked interest rates by 75 basis points, the most in almost 30 years. They'll make an announcement on Wednesday at 18 hours GMT. We're expecting 75 basis points up, could be even more than that. They'll then vacation in August and come back in September. Not sure what they'll do in September. There's talk now, because inflation seems to be coming down a little bit, that it may not be, as high as we had thought it might be. Gasoline's down, lumber's down, pre-used vehicles all down, food and rent not down. In fact, the median rent in Manhattan now is $5,000 a month. Can you believe that? It really is $5,000 a month, and in some of the boroughs as well. And of course, with inflation at a 40-year high, this is a big problem for Joe Biden, whose party is facing election on the Capitol Hill, which is we call midterm elections here, nationwide elections in November, and 40-year high inflation doesn't do much for his party. Guys?
And then on Thursday, a recession announced, maybe.
Well, yeah, possibly. Now, this is very interesting because, of course, we saw in the first quarter, the first 3 months of this year, the U.S. economy contracted by 1.6% year on year. If it does the same in the 3 months just ended, then technically that will be a recession. But you're going to see the White House and the Treasury push back on this and say, oh, no. We're not in a recession because we're taking on so many people. There's so much hiring going on. It can't possibly be a recession. So they're going to call it a transition or a slowdown. The Republicans are going to say, look, for goodness sake, wake up and admit there's a problem here and stop redefining terms. That's what they're going to say towards the end of the week. But technically, we could be in a recession. I mean, I do have to say, though, a recession is something that comes quite naturally after the kind of growth that we've had in America. It's not a depression. We're not going to go back to the 1920s. It's something that we just have to get through, and it doesn't need to be long and drawn out. It could actually be quite short. But it is true to say, ultimately, it could end up in some jobs being axed and company earnings could be hurt. So that's why people mention it so much. But, I mean, we've been through recessions so many times before. It's just part of the natural way of things. Anyway, today in New York, the Dow is up 71 points. The NASDAQ is down 1/3 of 1%. S&P 500 is up 5 points. And the NASDAQ is 12% now off its lows. So it's climbing back slowly. Guys?
John, thanks for that. That's our correspondent, John Terrace in New York.
EU energy ministers meet on Tuesday, expected to water down plans to ask countries to cut their winter gas use by 15%.
The proposals were made last week, but drew opposition from several countries. Our correspondent Giles Gibson reports from Brussels.
The European Commission is calling its plan Save Gas for a Safe Winter. And in addition to that voluntary pledge to cut gas consumption by 15% over the autumn and the winter, member states would also have to update their national emergency plans by the end of September. That means they'll have to set out exactly how they plan to reduce their gas consumption. Announcing the plan last week, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said member states are facing some tough but necessary decisions.
Russia is blackmailing us. Russia is using energy as a weapon. And therefore, in any event, whether it's a partial, major cutoff of Russian gas or a total cutoff of Russian gas, Europe needs to be ready.
However, the proposals also include a special mechanism that the European Commission could use to force member states to cut their gas consumption. That's in the event of an emergency. And that's the part that's proving so controversial, with several member states now pushing for exemptions to be written into any potential deal. And that's because different countries are in different positions right now. While countries such as Germany are heavily reliant on Russian gas supplies, other countries have a much more diversified energy mix. Similarly, while nations such as Hungary have their gas storage tanks at less than 50%, under half capacity, other countries such as Poland are in a much better position. The Spanish government minister Teresa Ribera really summed up these divisions that we're seeing between EU member states right now, saying pointedly, unlike other countries, the Spanish have not lived beyond their means. So once these talks wrap up on Tuesday, the European Commission's proposals could end up being significantly watered down. Giles Gibson for CGTN, Brussels.
One of Germany's largest residential landlords, LEG Immobilien, wants to restrict the supply of heat to its tenants this winter. The company, which lets out over 160,000 apartments to around 500,000 residents, is seeking legal permission to turn down temperatures amid the energy price crisis. Its chief executive says tough decisions are needed to help the country through gas shortages.
France's largest food retailer, Leclerc, is warning it may have to cut store opening hours to cope with energy shortages linked to the war in Ukraine. The French supermarket sector has already agreed on a series of measures, including switching off illuminated signs to be introduced from October. There are concerns over winter shortages due to unexpected maintenance works on nuclear reactors.
The French government says shops could be fined more than $750 if they keep their doors open while running air conditioning. It follows similar announcements by the mayors of Paris and Lyon. Pressure is growing to cut energy consumption across Europe, driven by EU sanctions on Russia and concerns that Moscow could weaponize fuel supplies.
You're watching CGTN, still ahead here on Global Business Europe. It's so big you can see it from space, the fast-moving wildfire that's sweeping through parts of California.
What I show of China is what I really experience in China, and it's very different to what people in the West experience in China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
I think it's fantastically important to educate British people about Chinese history and culture.
We have sown seeds which in China have grown to very big trees.
The values of horsemanship, respect, responsibility, compassion can be extended to all relationships.
My name is Max. I'm a food blogger. I grew up in China. Now I live in the UK.
We deserve respect, and the Chinese people with their own culture also deserve respect.
For cross-cultural understanding, I think food is a really good place to start. I hope to spread awareness of all the different cultures within China. I think there's a lot to share.
To increase understanding between cultures, I think time and patience is of course important, but the most important thing is responsibility.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
welcome back to Global Business Europe with Luigi Barkhill and Robin Dwyer. The headlines again. Spinning a deal for OneWeb. France's top satellite company wants to merge with its rival.
Europe's largest budget airline, Ryanair, returns to profits for the first time since the pandemic began, but warns the industry remains fragile.
And Ukraine says grain shipments could resume this week, but warns any more strikes on the port of Odessa will have major consequences. Well, let's get more on that story now and talk to Associated Press correspondent Sam Mednick, who's in Lviv in Ukraine. So, Sam, Ukraine hopeful then that exports of grain could restart as early as Wednesday.
Right. Despite this attack on the port of Odessa on Saturday, Ukraine says that the grain deal is moving ahead and that exports could begin as early as this week. Authorities in Odessa said that they are going to create a caravan of ships to escort the grains out of the port, and that the agreement doesn't require the full demining of the Black Sea. The Deputy Minister for Infrastructure gave a news conference today, and he said that all three ports would be used and that the grain would be escorted by Ukrainian rescue vessels, but that the process wouldn't be easy. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The port in Chornomorsk will be the first one, then Odessa, then Port Pivdeni. Overall, in 2 weeks, we will be technically ready to export out of all these terminals.
Ukraine says that this could add an additional $1 billion of money to Ukraine's budget, exporting these grains. Before the invasion, Ukraine was one of the world's largest exporters of grains, sunflower oil, as well as corn. The World Food Programme said that last year it exported some 51 million tons of grains, and that this year it's only exported a fraction of that. The World Food Programme, the UN has said that hopefully this deal will improve food prices across the world. The goal is to export some 5 million tons of grains a month over a renewable 120-day period.
And Sam, Russia has said that its overarching goal in Ukraine is to topple the government.
On Sunday, Russia's top diplomat Sergei Lavrov said that the goal was to oust the government, and he said in his words that Russia was determined to, in his words, liberate the Ukrainian people. Now, this comes in stark contrast to earlier comments earlier in the invasion by Russia that it had no intention of really ousting the government. These comments come as Russia continues launching missiles across Ukraine. The president's office said today that at least 2 people have been killed and 10 injured within the last 24 hours. A lot of this fighting is taking place in the northeast region of Kharkiv, as well as in the eastern region of Donetsk. In Donetsk, several towns have been hit, including the city of Bakhmut, where 5 houses were destroyed. And the governor of Kharkiv has said that at least 1 local club was destroyed and that people's bodies were being pulled from the rubble. Now, despite these attacks, analysts say that Russia is not making huge gains, particularly in the east. And they say that this could be largely in part to the HIMARS rocket launchers provided by the United States, which can fire missiles up to 80 kilometers going behind Russian lines. The Washington-based think tank, the Institute for the Study of War, said that it's seen images that show that there's less heat anomalies along the Donbass front line in the east since these HIMARS have come into the country.
Sam, thank you very much. That's Sam Mednick from the Associated Press in Lviv.
Some of Hungary's most popular lakes are drying out due to prolonged drought and extreme hot temperatures.
Scientists say they're alarmed at how fast it's happening and that the damage could become irreversible without swift action. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
Here in Lake Bichard, in the south of Hungary, the remnants of what was once a lake full of life are still visible. There is the slide that children once enjoyed as they plunged into the water, and the welcome cabin offering information to visitors. The pictures there of proud fishermen showing their biggest catch still remain. Rudolf Kaspar was one of those fishermen. He remembers those days with fondness.
It was a really good lake. On its island, people used to get married. There were fishing competitions and the village festival each year. There was life.
But that all changed in the past year, And now Lake Bichard is one of hundreds of lakes that have disappeared from the Hungarian landscape in the past decade.
This year's numbers show that 10 lakes were dried out.
This dry lake is an example of the effect that prolonged droughts and heat waves can have when they occur together. What's left now is just dried up sand and mud, which would normally be the bed of the lake, are underwater. Climate scientists in Hungary are concerned about what they say once was a weather rarity, extreme heat waves and prolonged periods of drought happening at the same time. This double whammy sucks up the moisture from the ground and prevents it from recovering. Currently, close to 90% of Hungary has a severe to extreme drought.
In the last decades, the groundwater level decreased a lot. Some places about 10 or 30 meters.
The conditions are so extreme that in some parts of Hungary, lakes that were once bursting with life are now bursting in flames.
All caused by the heat and dryness. Lakes like this are so dry that one spark will set it on fire.
Scientists say that the concurrence of heat waves and droughts is a direct cause of climate change.
What we call now extreme drought may become a new normal in the future.
Without immediate change, scenes like these could become a lot more common. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Lake Bichard.
Wildfires continue to burn in northern California, where thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes amid a state of emergency.
Fire has spread through a forest near Yosemite National Park, fueled by extreme heat and dry conditions. Our correspondent Benji Haya reports.
Mariposa County at the foothills of one of America's most iconic sites of natural beauty, Yosemite, now in flames. The fire, which started on Friday, is consuming forests and engulfing homes. High winds and bone-dry temperatures have fueled a blaze so large that it can be seen from space. Smoke billows for miles. Firefighters battle to contain the inferno from the air as hundreds tackle it from the ground, but they're still struggling to get it under control. It's a terrifying, apocalyptic, yet increasingly common scene in the US. In excess of 35,000 wildfires like this one have impacted nearly 5 million acres, or roughly 2 million hectares, this year alone. As California burns, much of the rest of the country is experiencing a heat wave. Advisory warnings are in effect in dozens of states. Across the south, temperatures are topping 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's almost 40 degrees Celsius. New Yorkers are also sweltering in this summer's hottest weather yet, finding any way they can for them and their pets to cool off.
Well, I feel nice and cold now. I wasn't before. I personally think it's way too hot. I'm sweating from everywhere.
I feel hot, but I am enjoying the sun.
Whilst some embrace the sizzling heat, others demand action, calling for Joe Biden to formally declare a climate emergency. The president did earlier this week announce a $2.3 billion package to help build infrastructure that can withstand dangerous weather and natural disasters. However, his climate legislation is stalling in Congress, with a senator from his own party even withdrawing support for the bill. Mr. Biden insists he's prepared to use every tool available to him to combat global warming. But the clock is ticking, and the threat is only expected to worsen in the months to come.
We have basically continued risk of extreme temperatures, 100-degree days, all the way out from here until at least early September.
And so, as Americans protect themselves from the heat, the pressure mounts on the nation to protect itself from what could lie ahead. Benji Haya, CGTN.
Myanmar's ruling military has executed 4 democracy activists, the country's first capital punishments to be carried out in decades. The The men were convicted of committing terror acts in closed-door trials, which relatives say they weren't allowed access to. They'd been accused of organising resistance against the army after it seized power in a coup last year. The executions have been widely condemned internationally.
Italy says nearly 1,200 undocumented migrants have reached its shores in the past 24 hours. Many were rescued at sea by boats run by charities. They're said to include people from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sudan, Ethiopia and Somalia. 5 bodies have also been recovered.
A smallpox vaccine has been approved for use against monkeypox by the European Commission. Imvanex is already being used to vaccinate against the disease in the United States. It comes after the World Health Organization declared the latest outbreak a global health emergency. Over 16,000 cases have been reported globally. Japan is the latest country to report its first case.
Tunisians are voting on a new constitution which would take some powers away from parliament and transfer them to the presidency. The referendum is being boycotted by opposition parties who've branded it a coup and an attempt to wipe out democratic gains made during the so-called Arab Spring uprisings of 2011. Voter turnout is expected to be low amid a worsening economic crisis in the country.
President of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., says he wants the country to achieve 7% economic growth in his first year in office.
He's been giving his first State of the Nation address since a landslide election win in May. Our correspondent Gretchen Malalad reports from the capital, Manila.
President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s first State of the Nation address was centered on the economy and the reforms needed for the country to recover from the pandemic. He said that his administration will implement a solid fiscal policy management and is targeting 6.5% to 7.5% gross domestic product growth this year. He plans to overhaul the country's tax system to improve the collection process and set new taxes for digital services. He stated that the country will become a destination for investment and tourism. President Marcos Jr. also focused on the country's agriculture sector. He enumerated his big plans for the sector on how to boost more output to make the country food sufficient and rely less on imports. This is also an answer to the looming global food crisis due to the conflict in Ukraine. He promised a moratorium on farmers' debts to allow them to channel resources into improving their farms. To entice the young generation to get involved in agriculture, he promised to give land to new agriculture graduates. He also highlighted that the infrastructure is a backbone of an economy, and he will continue the infrastructure projects of former President Rodrigo Duterte. In the health sector and pandemic response, he said that there will be no more lockdown measures, but the government will focus on vaccination and booster shots. He plans to put up more specialized hospitals in the provinces and set up a vaccine institute. He also vowed to help improve the situation of the country's frontliners. In terms of his foreign policy agenda, he said that the country will stand firm in its independent foreign policy. He said that the Philippines will be a good neighbor and will cooperate and collaborate. But if there are differences in views, diplomacy and more talks will be the way.
The Philippines shall continue to be a friend to all, an enemy to none. But we will not waver. We will stand firm in our independent foreign policy with the national interest as our primordial guide.
President Marcos Jr. urged Congress to pass the administration's 19 priority bills regarding tax reforms, renewable energy, e-commerce law, and more. President Marcos Jr. ended his address full of hope despite the challenges that his administration is facing. He said that the government has the best people to navigate through the global crisis, the pandemic, and whatever new challenges may occur. He assured every Filipino that the state of the nation is sound. Gretchen Malalad, CGTN, Manila.
Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has relaunched his election campaign. Opinion polls show him trailing his main rival, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, with just over 2 months until voting starts in October. Our correspondent Lucrecia Franco reports.
Brazil's far-right President Jair Bolsonaro's candidacy is now official. At a convention of the center-right Liberal Party in the Maracanãzinho, or Little Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro, he was nominated to run re-election. Attended by some 10,000 of his hardcore supporters, The kickoff saw Bolsonaro, who's trailing badly in the polls, deliver a speech along with his wife, repeating his rhetoric of us against them, that is, right against left.
We know that the other side has malice, has lies, has false promises. We have the reality, and the only difference between us is that I am on the stage. And what I want to do far ahead is leave a better country than the one we inherited in 2019.
Earlier this month, hoping to turn his fortunes around, Bolsonaro got approval from Brazil's Congress for an aid package that allows him to spend around $7.6 billion until the end of the year. A recent study found that 33 million Brazilians are currently suffering from hunger.
But despite Bolsonaro's strategies to attract voters, all polls suggest he will be defeated by former President Lula da Silva in the first round on October 2nd, or in a second round on October 30.
Last Thursday, Lula da Silva was also officially nominated by his left-wing Workers' Party, but the politician who served as president from 2003 until 2010 did not attend the convention, as he's campaigning across the country, promising to bring it back to the time he was in office.
We need to make this country more human again. The country needs to like books, not weapons. This country needs to be prone to love, not hate. This country needs employment, and this is what we will do.
Third in the opinion polls, center-leftist Ciro Gomes launched his candidacy last week as well. Unlikely to pose a serious challenge to either Lula or Bolsonaro, who Gomes claims are two sides of the same coin, some analysts predict he might become a kingmaker. This is his fourth presidential run.
I will try to unite a country around a new project and not around my personality.
With about 70 days to go, it seems clear at this point is that there is little chance that Brazil's election will happen without drama, as each candidate tries to unite a deeply divided country. Lucrecia Franco, CGTN, Rio de Janeiro.
Still to come on CGTN. Kicking off, but not kitted out. England's football clubs try to tackle a shirt shortage less than a week before the start of the season.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your...
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The world's richest sports league, American football's NFL, has launched a dedicated mobile streaming service.
Called NFL Plus, it will cost $5 a month and gives fans the ability to live stream games on their phones or tablets. The league's commissioner says it will provide a better understanding of what supporters want. The NFL already has a TV rights package with 4 broadcast partners worth more than $100 billion through to 2033.
Well, football or soccer fans in England hoping to get their hands on their team's new kit are facing disappointment due to supply problems. The new season kicks off this weekend, but less than half of England's top 92 professional clubs have both home and away kits on sale.
Professor Kieran Maguire is a lecturer in football finance at the University of Liverpool. I asked him whether clubs could have prepared better.
Kits are normally designed between 9 and 12 months before delivery. What we have seen is that the major producers of football kits, which are based in Asia, in China, in Thailand, in Vietnam, they have experienced factory closures as a result of COVID and governments taking cautious approaches with regards to the spread of the disease. And then there have been further issues in respect of the global logistics and supply chain issues. Shanghai port, for example, has been extremely busy as there's been unusual demand for a variety of products. And this means that football shirts in particular have fallen down the priority list as far as shipping companies and container companies are concerned.
So football shirts are usually fairly expensive. How much do shirt sales contribute to a football club's finances?
Well, if we take a look at a club such as Manchester United, it has a 10-year contract with Adidas, which is worth just short of $1 billion. So it is very lucrative. The way that it tends to work is that the clubs get a very large flat fee from the manufacturers each year, and on top of that, they get a small commission. So Manchester United, for example, have 7%. This means that the clubs, especially the elite clubs, are quite insulated from any downturn in the volume of sales, and the real strugglers here will be the kit manufacturers, because they've effectively paid in advance to the clubs, and they're reliant upon the sales of kits to recoup that money.
So how damaging could it be financially for them not to be available now when there has been less money coming in from ticket sales over the summer?
Well, as part of the economic squeeze that is being seen in the UK, I think football kits are deemed to be discretionary expenditure, but given the close attachment that many football fans have to their clubs, it's always surprising to see the level of sales, any expected drops in volume materialise. So I think this will be more of a cash flow issue for clubs, because they tend to have 2 peak periods of sales, and that's when the kits are launched, which we have seen. And the major clubs, the likes of Manchester United and Liverpool and Manchester City and Chelsea, haven't had too many problems with regards to being able to supply. But also in the weeks preceding Christmas, they tend to be very popular as presents in that time frame. So if the kits don't arrive in the next few weeks, I think it will cause cash flow issues for smaller clubs, which they will hope to recoup later in this year.
Mark Toulouse made $200 million as one of the first investors in Skype. He also went on to start his own company and now employs 5,000 people worldwide.
He's been telling CGTN Europe that his first job taught him the benefits of working hard and also how to deal with difficult people.
I came out of university, I really had no particular skills, and I was fortunate enough to be hired by what is now Anderson Consulting. They taught me about the values of hard work. They taught me how to work. They also taught me about how to deal with good and not so good people. And so all together, a great school to prepare me for what became my career in venture capital after that.
To hear more of that and find out more on our new series, check out CGTN's social media accounts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and TikTok, and just search for My First Job.
Now, a water lily pad that can double as a raft, leaves that can be torn in half and then put back together again, and probably the smallest pineapple you've ever seen.
They're just a few of the weird and wonderful plants to be found at the South China Botanical Garden in Guangzhou. Our correspondent Cao Chu-Feng has been to see them.
Now called the South China National Botanical Garden, this organization was founded in 1929. It's the biggest subtropical botanical garden in the world. with nearly 20,000 different species of plants. Many of them are open for view to the public.
These plants floating on the water right now are called Victoria water lily. They can support a very heavy load. A 30-kilogram child can sit quite safely on these leaves. And I'm now standing just beside the conservatory. A lot of very interesting plants are being planted over there. So let's go look. This is a very interesting plant. You can tear its needle-shaped leaves apart and then put them back together. Now, pineapples are usually about this big, but here I just found a cute mini version. These fruits are about the size of 2 thumbs. They are normally used for decorations. People don't really eat them, but I do really wonder what they taste like.
This is one of the oldest botanical research institutions in China, with a mission to study and protect plants.
This is Primulina huaiji ennis. We found it in 2010 in Huaiji, Guangdong. At that time, there were around 200 of them in the wild. Now it's completely disappeared in the natural environment. But it's well protected here in the South China Botanical Garden. This is a sprout. We used biotechnology to germinate its seeds.
Associate Director Yan Junhua says being included into the National Botanical Garden system will strengthen its ability to protecting endangered plants and preserve biodiversity.
One of the most important functions of our botanical gardens is ex situ conservation. In the past, this job has focused on protecting plant individuals and driven by the interests of our scientists and their projects. Now, this will become more systematic. Our focus will no longer only be protecting the plant individuals, but also their organs, seeds, DNA, and etc.
Yan says the establishment of a national botanical garden system in China will provide a standard for the construction of botanical gardens across the country and give the public a better understanding of the achievements and significance of botanical gardens in plant conservation. Cao Chufeng, CGTN, Guangzhou.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.